this? Oh, these are bagpipes. And believe it or not, you can play music on this. They belong to my friend Rodney, down at the Great Ocean Tug and Salvage Company. Rodney wants to start a Big Harbour bagpipe band, so I said I would learn to play the bagpipes so that I could play along with them, too. Oh, boy, these bagpipes sure are tough to play, though. Ouch, that hurt. Yikes, you know, these things could be dangerous. I don't know. Maybe I'm not ready to be a bagpipe player. I wonder what Theodore would do. You see, there was a time when, well, Theodore did something that, well, maybe wasn't something for a tugboat to do. One day, Theodore and Emily were bringing Clementine, the container ship, into her dock at the container terminal. Theodore just loved visiting the container terminal. Well, there was always so much going on, with ships from every ocean in the world, coming and going, unloading their cargo. But the very best thing about the container terminal was the crane. As soon as Theodore had helped Emily dock Clementine, he cruised around to watch the giant harbor crane work. The crane rumbled his special container lifter out over the ship, then lowered it down to grab the first container off the ship. He rumbled and roared and made all kinds of powerful noises. Now he started to lift the container higher, higher, and higher, until it looked to Theodore as high as a building. Theodore had never really met the crane before, but he had always wanted to. He floated as close as he could so the crane could see him. "Hello up there," he called. "I'm Theodore Tugboat, and I move ships." "Hello down there," the crane called back. "I'm Clayton the Harbour Crane, and I lift the containers off the ships you move." Theodore smiled. Clayton was kind of funny. Clayton began to rumble back down his track, carrying the container way up in the sky. Theodore was worried that Clayton might drop it. But Clayton came to a smooth stop and lowered the container slowly and carefully, just as gentle as a tugboat moving a ship into her dock. "That looks terrific," said Theodore. "I'd like to lift containers, too." A little while later, Theodore came rushing up to Emily, who was at the fuel dock getting her oil. "Emily! Emily! Guess what?" shouted Theodore. "I met the harbor crane. His name is Clayton, and he lifts great big containers all by himself, as high as a building." "I know," said Emily. "I like to watch him, too." "Well, I'm going to lift big things," declared Theodore. Theodore began to lower his special hauling rope with a tow hook on the end into the water, like he was a giant harbor crane about to lift a container. Suddenly, he felt a thunk on the end of his hook. "I caught something!" he shouted. "Watch me lift it up, Emily." Theodore began to raise his hauling rope to lift what he had caught. It's heavy," he gasped. "It may be an old container that fell in the water, or it could be a whole ship." Emily floated around to see what Theodore had found. And then she started to laugh. What's so funny?" grunted Theodore. "You got a dock bumper," giggled Emily. It was true. Theodore had hooked a bumper. Emily set off for home, still smiling. "I bet I'd be really good at lifting things," Theodore said to himself. "I bet I could lift something really big." The following morning, a thick fog hung over the whole harbor. But work must go on, fog or shine. Clementine, the container ship, was ready to leave the harbor now, with a new load of containers to take across the ocean. Theodore and Emily gave 2 sharp blasts of their whistles and set off with the ship. Soon, they had reached the edge of the ocean. They were careful to steer around bell buoys and the underwater rocks they guarded. "Come around, Theodore," ordered Emily. "Keep your tow rope tight." Theodore tightened his tow rope and helped steer the container ship safely around the bell buoy. By now, the fog was so thick, Theodore could barely see past his own bumpers. What was that? There was something in the water. Theodore strained to see what it could be. It was a dark shape, like the tip of a rock. "Rock!" shouted Theodore, blasting his biggest whistle. "Turn!" he shouted to Emily. "Turn!" Theodore shoved the back of the ship away from the rock as hard as he could, while up front, Emily did the same thing. With a terrible wrenching sound, the containers on board the ship shifted from one side to the other. One fell overboard. "Container overboard!" cried Clementine. It floated near the surface for a moment, then sank beneath the bubbles. As soon as the tugs brought the ship safely to a stop, they went to look at the rock. "That's not a rock," said Emily, floating closer. "That's a bumper." That's when Theodore realized it was the dock bumper, the one he had tried to lift with his hauling rope. "I thought I put it back on the dock safely," he said in a small voice. "It must have fallen off." "Now we have an even bigger problem," Emily frowned. "The container has disappeared under the water." "Well, we have to get it back," called Clementine. "I can't leave without it." The tugs knew that by now that container had sunk all the way to the bottom of the harbor. "We need help," Emily decided, "to lift it back up. Theodore, you stay here with the ship." Emily hurried off to get help. Theodore slowly turned back to the spot where the container had sunk. "I can lift it up," he said suddenly, "just like a harbor crane." And right then and there, he began to lower his hauling rope. First, he had to catch the container with the tow hook on the end of his rope. "That container's got to be down there somewhere," he said, shifting around. Suddenly, he felt something on the end of his hook. "Got it!" he shouted. "Do you really think you can lift that container up?" asked Clementine, who was beginning to get nervous. "It's very heavy. Maybe we better wait for help." "Oh, I can do it," replied Theodore. "Clayton, the Harbour Crane, does it all the time." Theodore started to raise his hauling rope back up to lift the container. At first, nothing happened. Theodore rumbled and roared and made all kinds of powerful noises as he tried to raise the heavy container. "It's moving," he grunted. "I'm lifting it." Sure enough, the heavy container was beginning to lift off the mud on the bottom. "Almost there," Theodore gasped. "Just a little more." "Am I going to get my container back?" shouted Clementine. Smoke was beginning to pour from Theodore's stack as he struggled to lift the heavy container, and he could feel his engine getting hotter and hotter. Suddenly, there was a sickening thud deep in his hull. Well, Theodore had to let go his hauling rope and watched helplessly as it spilled back into the water. And the container went with it all the way to the bottom. Emily arrived back pulling Shelburne, the sea barge. Right away, by the look on Theodore's face, she knew something was the matter. "I think," said Theodore, "I hurt my engine." Emily left Shelburne to raise the container and floated with Theodore to the repair dock. "What happened, Theodore?" asked Emily. "I was trying to lift the container like Clayton," Theodore said in a quiet voice. "But containers are really heavy," said Emily. "Well, Clayton lifts them all the time." Emily really didn't know what to say. Now, Clayton had heard everything Theodore was saying. "You know," he called, "sometimes I'd like to jump into the water just like a tugboat." And then the most surprising thing happened. Clayton began to roll faster and faster towards the end of his dock, straight towards the water. To Theodore, it looked like Clayton really did think he could jump in the water and float like a tugboat. "Stop! Stop!" cried Theodore. "You can't be a tugboat." "Why not?" called Clayton. Because we're different." "Different?" repeated Clayton, rumbling to a stop. "I'm good at pulling ships," Theodore explained. "Yes, you are. Very good," agreed Clayton. And you're good at lifting containers," Theodore went on. "Well," said Clayton, yes, I am. Maybe I better stick to lifting containers." "And maybe," said Theodore, feeling a sore engine, "maybe I better stick to pulling ships." "Now that's a good idea," said Clayton with a big grin in his voice. "Clayton, you weren't really going to try and float like a tugboat, were you?" said Theodore. "Well, no, not really," chuckled Clayton. "But I sure fooled you, didn't I?" "You sure did," grinned Theodore. "I knew you were just kidding," smiled Emily. Just then, Northumberland's submarine bobbed up from below the water, back from a long night out under the ocean. "Boy, wouldn't it be great to float under the water like a submarine?" said Theodore. "Terrific," said Clayton right away. "Theodore?" Well, fortunately for Emily, Clayton and Theodore began to laugh. "Boy, Emily, we really fooled you," they shouted. "You sure did," smiled Emily. "Being a tugboat is the best," grinned Theodore. Even though Theodore can't be a crane and Clayton can't be a tugboat, they're both really great at what they are. You know something else? I really don't think I'm a bagpipe player. But I think Rodney will understand. I'll just tell him a story about Theodore and the Harbour Crane. Thanks for visiting us here in the Big Harbour. We'll see you all again next time. Maybe Rodney's band could use a good tuba player.
Theodore, he's a tugboat and a friendly tugboat too. A friendly tugboat too. Oh, Theodore likes to do the things that friendly tugboats do. Pushing and a pulling in the great big harbor, in the great big world is so much fun. So many brand new things to discover. Waking with the sun, gotta get the job done. Oh, Theodore and Emily, Vodak, Hank and George and the harbor master too.
Hello. I'm just trying to fix my pants here. No, I think this patch is too small. You know, last week, this hole was tiny. It was no bigger than a periwinkle's pinky. And then I crawled under my desk looking for my pencil, and it got bigger. And then I put my pants in the washing machine, and it got bigger. And then I got it caught on my desk. And now look at it. You know, I bet if I'd taken care of this hole in the first place, it wouldn't have gotten this big. That reminds me an awful lot of what happened to Hank. Yeah, the time that his whistle got wheezy. Oh, he wished he'd done something sooner, too. It was the day of the Big Harbour tugboat races, and Hank was so excited he couldn't sleep. The other tugs were all still snoring away, huddled together against the cold, wet morning. There's no use sitting around here waiting for everyone else to wake up, Hank said to himself. I may as well practice. Let's see how fast I can get to Bedford Buoy. Then, very softly, because he didn't want to wake everyone up, he whispered, on your mark, get set, go. And off he raced. Hank was thrilled at how fast he was going. But Bedford Buoy wasn't. Bedford had been sleeping soundly. Then, next thing he knew, there was Hank hurtling toward him full speed ahead. Hi, Bedford, said Hank, stopping just in front of him. How are you this morning? Well, better than you by the sound of it, replied Bedford, who noticed that Hank was making some pretty strange noises. You're wheezing. Now, Hank wasn't worried. Oh, it's nothing, he replied. Just the rain. Gotta get practicing again. Bedford wanted him to rest a minute until his whistle was better. But before he could say, and they're off, Hank was racing back to the Great Ocean dock. Well, by this time, the other tugs were just shaking to sleep from their stacks. Oh, I wonder where Hank is, Theodore yawned as he peered around the gray harbor morning. And then, suddenly, there was Hank, barreling straight for the dock. Isn't it just like Hank to be up at the crack of dawn practicing? Theodore chuckled to himself. Ready to practice? Theodore didn't like the sound of the noise Hank was making. I think you should get your wheezy whistle checked, he said to his friend. Oh, I'm just excited about the race, said Hank. Well, within minutes, he and the other tugs all racing back to Bedford Buoy. And with all his hard work, Hank did very well. But while the other tugs cheered, Theodore couldn't help but notice that the race had made Hank's whistle even worse. It was still drizzly and cold by the time the morning work meeting started. The wet weather was hard on Hank's wheezy whistle, but he wasn't going to let that slow him down. He was too excited about the big race. Hank, said the dispatcher, I'd like you to help Theodore move the barges to get ready for the race. Yes, sir, Hank replied happily. The dispatcher noticed Hank's wheeze for the first time. And make sure you go to the repair dock sometime today to get that wheezy whistle checked, he added. On the way to work, Hank talked non-stop about the race. Do you think everyone's going to come? I wonder what the prizes are going to be. Theodore noticed that Hank wasn't keeping up. Hank, we can't stop and talk about the race now, said Theodore. We've got to get the barges moved. But the look on Hank's face told Theodore that he wasn't stopping to talk. He was stopping to catch his breath. Why don't you go to the repair dock now instead of after work? Theodore asked. You're really slowing down. I can move the barges on my own. Oh, well, all right, replied Hank a little sadly. He didn't really want to go to the repair dock. He wanted to help get everything ready for the race. Maybe it was because he had finally slowed down, or maybe it was because the weather was clearing up. But as he got closer to the repair dock, Hank's wheezy whistle began to feel a lot better. There's no more funny noises, thought Hank. You know, I don't think I really need to go in the repair dock after all. I'll just practice instead. Hank turned and headed off for the cove, where he could practice out of the way of the other boats. It took Theodore quite a bit longer to move all the barges himself, but he didn't mind. He thought that Hank had sounded awfully wheezy, and Theodore wanted to make sure he was fixed up in time for the race. And it wouldn't be long now before the race began. The barges were all in place. The starting line and the finish lines were set up. And everyone in the harbor was doing their part to get the last-minute decorations up. The sun had even managed to break through the clouds. Fodak blew his whistle to get everyone's attention. Welcome, everyone, to the Big Harbour Tugboat races, the dispatcher declared. Will all tugboats please take their places? The harbor was buzzing with excitement as everyone got in line. But Theodore was beginning to get concerned. Hank should have been back from the repair dock a long time ago, he said to himself. Everyone ready? Asked the dispatcher. Theodore kept searching the harbor for a sign of his friend. And then he got a funny feeling in his engine. I wonder if there's something wrong with Hank, he thought. On your mark, declared the dispatcher. Get set. Stop, shouted Theodore. Everyone was suddenly very quiet. All the boats turned and looked at Theodore in surprise. Excuse me, Theodore said in his bravest voice. I'm sorry I stopped the race. But I'm concerned about Hank. He'd never miss the race. I think he's not feeling well. He was very wheezy today. The dispatcher looked at him in silence. For a moment, Theodore was afraid he was going to be angry. You're quite right, Theodore, said the dispatcher. For now, I'm going to call off the race. Well, everybody in the harbor floated still and silent. Tugboats, I'd like you all to go and look for Hank. Theodore headed off alone to the repair dock. He wanted Hank to be there. Maybe it's just taking a little longer than we thought to fix him up, he said to himself. But Hank was nowhere to be seen at the repair dock. Theodore felt that funny feeling in his engine again. Where is Hank? He wondered. He hadn't gone very far when he heard a familiar sound. It was louder than before, but it was definitely Hank's funny wheeze. Hank? Theodore! I'm not late for the race, am I? Hank asked. Oh, no, Theodore replied. You've got plenty of time. I just thought I'd go to the repair dock first. Well, I was just thinking of going there myself, said Hank. Great, said Theodore, smiling. Do you mind if I practice my towing on the way? Oh, that sounds like fun, said Hank, thankfully. And with Theodore helping him to the repair dock, Hank sailed easily for the first time that day. wasn't long before Hank's stack was unstuffed and his whistle washed. But to Hank, it seemed to take forever. He sure wasn't going to let that happen again. Next time, he promised Theodore, I won't wait until my whistle gets really wheezy before I go to the repair dock. Good idea, said Theodore, who was glad to hear that Hank was going to be more careful. Now, let's get back to the dock. Everyone's missed you. And with that, the two tugs sailed off to see their friends. All the tugs were really happy to have Hank back, looking and sounding like his old self again. This is a very special occasion, said the dispatcher. So I would like to announce the official reopening of the Big Harbour tugboat races. The tugs all tooted their whistles in excitement, with Hank, of course, tooting the loudest of all. There is one thing, though, the dispatcher went on. Hank, I know you'd love to sail in the race, but today I think I have a better idea. Not sail in the race. Hank suddenly felt very heavy, like he was pulling a giant barge full of cargo all by himself. He felt so sad that he almost didn't hear what the dispatcher said next. Instead, Hank, I would like you to do something very important. I'd like you to be the dispatcher and start the race for me. Me? Be you? I mean, the dispatcher be me? I mean, me be the dispatcher? Gasped Hank. In just a moment, Hank had gone from very sad to very happy. And so on that day, although Hank himself didn't race, his heart certainly did. As he declared in his biggest dispatcher voice, "On your mark, get set." Everyone tooted their loudest whistles, and Hank tooted the loudest of all. Well, I don't know about Hank, but I'm certainly going to take care of things right away next time. It's like my old granny always said, a stitch in time saves 9. See, there's a bigger patch. Thanks for visiting us all here in the Big Harbour. We'll see you again next time. Oh. Well, I'm glad I got a bigger patch because I think I'm gonna need it.
Theodore, he's a tugboat and a friendly tugboat too. A friendly tugboat too. Oh, Theodore likes to do the things that friendly tugboats do. Pushing and a pulling in the great big harbor, in the great big world is so much fun. So many brand new things to discover. Waking with the sun, gotta get the job done. Oh, Theodore and Emily, Theodore, Hank and George and the harbor master too.